Well, welcome, man. I appreciate you coming down.
Thank you for having me.
So originally how this was set up, I had a call out on Twitter looking for people that I can sit down and talk about Keynesian versus Austrian economics, and your name came up like 100 times. And thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. And I kind of really want to jump into it. I have like two primary questions for you. Question number one, what got you interested in Bitcoin? Well, let's talk about that. And then we'll go into what your definitions and differences between the two philosophies of economics.
Yeah. So what got me originally interested in Bitcoin was that I was interested in Austrian economics in the first place. Even though I did my PhD at Columbia University, and my PhD was not in Austrian economics, it was very much mainstream economics. I started reading more and more Austrian economics books, thanks to the Mises Institute's website, basically. And I found myself more and more interested in the concepts of that school, in particular the concept of money and sound money and a free market in money, and the monetary results, the results of monetary manipulation or central planning of the interest rate. So these were issues that I was quite interested in 2008, 2009, 2010, around which point Bitcoin came out. And I heard about Bitcoin because of, being interested in these topic. And initially, I was quite skeptical of the possibility that Bitcoin could work. I wasn't really sure that it could succeed, that it could sustain continuous operation for a significant amount of time. I thought it would be attacked. But over time, it continued to refuse to go away, and I continued to learn more and more about it, about how cryptography works, and about the technical aspects of the proof of work, and all of these aspects of how Bitcoin is secured and how it's operated. And so I became more and more interested and fascinated with it.
Were you studying Austrian economics while you're still in school, or?
Well, I was studying it on my own, but I wasn't really part of my program for graduation.
I wonder why they never teach it, though.
Yeah, very interesting question.
You know what I mean? If it's supposed to be, an institution of learning.
Yeah.
And so, what was your aha moment when you really understood Bitcoin? Like, this is something.
I think really primarily the moment that I realized, okay, Bitcoin is something real, was probably in 2013. Until then I'd been hearing about Bitcoin as an obscure thing in the internet, and I was watching it grow, and I was continuously skeptical of the possibility that it would survive. And in my mind, there were, several scenarios in which that I imagined would be fatal to Bitcoin. And because it was so small and because it was so tiny, I thought, some major event of bad publicity, somebody who's dealing with Bitcoin gets thrown in jail, gets implicated in some criminal activity, rightly or wrongly, and that's just going to be devastating for the market. It'll destroy the market, it'll destroy the value of the coin, probably destroy the security of the coin. And so at that stage, I was still skeptical of the possibility that this kind of economic system, all of these economic incentives together, could continue to sustain such a significant negative shock. And then that happened around mid-2013 with the Silk Road bust. And so in my mind, this was supposed to be what was going to be the end of Bitcoin, and yet Bitcoin didn't collapse, it didn't fail. In fact, it continued to grow. And the number of transactions on the network continued to increase. And the fact that it emerged from this incident stronger than before in arguably any technical indicator you could choose was really the moment that I thought, okay, this is something serious. There's a very good alignment of economic incentives in this that has made me revise my initial skepticism and make me think that, okay, this thing has legs, it can run, it can continue to run for another decade or two or three or
But when
50.
when you understood it, when you had that aha moment, were you viewing Bitcoin more or less as a means of exchange, as currency, or were you viewing it as something as digital gold, which is a narrative today?
I think it's quite unfortunate that people see those two things as
Black and
being
white.
black and white, and also as being distinct properties. When in a very real sense, the two properties are inextricably linked, that they're intertwined, they can't be separated. In other words, anytime something is chosen as a medium of exchange, it means that it is acquired for the sake of being exchanged later on. So during that period, there's a period in which it is held purely as a store of value. So you can't be a medium of exchange unless you're a store of value. And you can't be a store of value. And you know, to be a store of value is to then be used as a medium of exchange, because the point of storing the value is to later on exchange it. So these two functions are quite are very strongly linked. That they have to come together, and they're just how money emerges on a market. These are the properties of what makes something money, basically.
For example, the USD currency.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
well, yeah, because I mean, the only way that the dollar has gotten its monetary
By
status,
force?
not quite, is because it was backed by gold.
well, it was backed by gold.
Yes, and it still is, because you know the central bank of the United States still holds a very large amount of gold, and
They
central
hold
banks
gold, but
still
it's not
hold
pegged.
gold. No, it is not. However, the central bank of the United States is the one that holds the most amount of gold. That's why the global monetary system was built around the dollar, because the U.S. Central bank had the most amount of dollars after World War II. But the thing is,
they also confiscated everyone's gold too.
well, exactly, yes,
Fuck.
yeah. But that's the thing. So it's not about you know, the key thing is that government is not able to dictate what money is. So no government has ever been able to pass off its own pieces of paper as money successfully. It has had to have these pieces of paper backed by a money that was either the choice of a market like gold or silver at certain points in time, or that it was backed by a currency that is backed by these things. So today, a lot of central banks have currencies that are not backed by gold, but are backed by currencies that are backed by gold, that have gold. So the world's central banks still continue to hold gold. And so effectively, the choice of the money in the market is still the market's choice. Governments, their you know, what they try to do is to try to appropriate that choice. So that's why they confiscated the gold. They couldn't just ban gold's monetary role, they had to confiscate it. And that's why Bitcoin is so interesting, because it is designed with one prime directive and objective in mind, which is to resist confiscation and to resist centralization and centralized control. That's what makes it so interesting.
Would you say another interesting aspect is, at least for now, the issuance is set in stone, right? For example, since they unpegged the gold, the supply and demand issuance of at least the USD has skyrocketed. Like with quantitative easing, they printed $2 trillion worth of money. It's simple mathematics. If you have more supply, what happens? The demand decreases.
Yep.
For the market.
Yeah, that's a key concept that I discuss in my book, which is that ultimately Bitcoin is heading towards being the form of money whose supply increases at the lowest rate, at the reliably lowest rate, and it's going to go below the rate of increase of gold over the next few years. And so this arguably has been extremely important for gold assuming its monetary role, because this is what the thing that makes gold so different from all other metals, that the new supply is always a very tiny fraction compared to the overall stockpiles. So the supply of gold is always increasing at a very small rate, but Bitcoin is going to start increasing at a lower rate,
Yes.
and eventually tend towards zero. So it's the first example of an asset, of a liquid asset that we as humans have ever had, that is truly, strictly scarce in a meaningful sense, because everything else is only scarce in a relative sense. It's scarce in the sense of there's a limit on how much time we dedicate towards producing more of it. But Bitcoin is strictly scarce. None of it, no more than 21 of it can be made. Whereas with other things, you know, no matter how scarce they are, if we dedicate more resources towards digging for copper or gold or silver or oil, we'll always find more. We always continue to find more.
What's going to happen once the mining rewards disappear in the future?
Well, the way that I look at it is that, you know, if people value the service that Bitcoin provides, then people will continue to pay for Bitcoin blocks. If Bitcoin block space continues to be valuable, people will pay to get on it. And so currently the way in which you pay for getting on a Bitcoin block is that holding the Bitcoins, you know, the monetary What secures the network ultimately is that people hold the coins, which gives the coins values. And that gives the mining rewards value, so that miners want to secure the network, want to dedicate their electricity and processing power towards securing the network, because they know the coins would be liquid and they'd be able to sell them. So as a holder, you're subsidizing the network by accepting all the new inflation or all the new creation of coins that is effectively increasing the supply, therefore bringing down the price of the existing coins. So currently, the security of the network comes from the fact that the holders are willing to sustain the inflationary dumping of new coins, which today is in the volume of, I think, around $5 or $6 or $7 million a day of new Bitcoins that are being produced on the market. So as a Bitcoin holder, you're accepting that that stuff is chipping away at the price, because that's new supply that's coming onto the market to meet the new demand. So that's how it is being subsidized today. That's how Bitcoin security is being paid for today, primarily. However, I see no reason why, if people value the block space, if people value the holding of the coins, that they wouldn't be paying for the block space. And so they would, we saw it in December of 2017. We saw how a transaction fee market developed.
Yes.
And I see no reason why it wouldn't develop. In my mind, of course, if people decide that they don't value Bitcoin enough, if the demand for Bitcoin declines and the price of one Bitcoin drops to 5 cents, then arguably, Bitcoin security is going to be compromised, and arguably it's going to be easy to attack it, and arguably, potentially it would fail. But that's always the scenario. So I think that's still the case, whether you're going with transaction fees or whether you're going with the current mining reward. Eventually, if people don't value it, they're not going to pay for it, and then the system falls apart. But if people value it, then they'll continue to pay for it, whether it's through transaction fees or through the reward, and it will continue to operate. So I don't see why transitioning towards a fee market should be any different or any problem for Bitcoin. What Bitcoin needs is just to continue to have demand in both cases.
Where do you think the future of mining is going to go with Bitcoin? Do you think we're going to get smaller nanometers for like ASICs chips? Do you think it's going to be cheaper electricity? It's going to hit the market? Like, where do you foresee mining within this industry?
I think the one important trend that is emerging from mining is that anybody who's using grid-priced electricity to mine, or to mine based on fossil fuel-powered plants, is largely not going to be able to make a profit. I think over several years, there's quite a good reason to suggest that if you're mining with, if you're mining based on the price of electricity that is available in a major city, or in major industrial centers, you are almost certainly going to be losing money. Well, not almost certainly, but in the long run, it's not going to always be profitable. And I think that's something that's always going to be the case with Bitcoin because of the difficulty adjustment, which I discuss in depth in my book, and I find that to be the most fascinating aspect of Bitcoin's economic design. The difficulty adjustment makes it so that it's always increasing the margin. It's always increasing the difficulty of finding the block rewards, and therefore making it less and less profitable for the miners. So in other words, if you are able to be profitable mining Bitcoin at 10 cents per kilowatt hour today, then that's a relatively cheap price. That's a relatively affordable price that's available to many people all over the world.
Yeah, to everybody,
It's going to be a very large amount of people that are going to be able to profit from it. And so many of them are going to start mining at that price. And so therefore, the difficulty will adjust upward, which is going to lead to the profitability of people mining at 10 cents to drop and then to be eroded away. And so when push comes to shove, like in the bear market, as we've seen over the last year or so, the only miners that continue to remain profitable are the ones that are operating with energy that has a close to zero marginal
Yeah.
cost. Because in these locations, where the energy has no alternative use, you have excess energy that's isolated, stranded, that can't be connected to a grid and can't be sent to a major city. That's energy that's practically free. So building mining installations around these areas is what's going to be profitable. So the exciting thing about Bitcoin mining is that it's leading to more and more development around these isolated places. And so that's going to lead to more and more growth in all of these kinds of.
I saw like an interesting stat that because of Bitcoin mining, we're actually finding out true price discovery of energy.
Absolutely. It's creating a global liquid market in energy where energy can now be bought and sold and anywhere in the world because it can be converted into Bitcoin hashes and therefore monetized. So anywhere in the world where you have a source of energy, you can sell it effectively by installing Bitcoin miners there and making them do the work, which can be a massive initial step towards capitalizing these places, towards building capital investment in these places, towards utilizing the energy sources.
Because they're just not mining Bitcoin; they're mining anything that's a proof of work chain, right?
Yeah.
And so, what's your thoughts now then on all these different derivatives now? Like, so we had like the big one, the forked Bitcoin Cash, and they had their own internal world, not Bitcoin Cash, and whatever, BSV. So what's your thoughts on the whole this? Well, now there's like shit ton of forks. I can't even keep up with how many forks are going on.
Yeah, that's the point. So I mean, the more that Bitcoin forks happen, the more they dilute their own brand.
Yes.
So nobody now remembers what kind of fork is there out there, and each one of them becomes just a stupid cult of personality around the person around it. So essentially, none of them matter, and this whole exercise has served to really illustrate what it is exactly that is important about Bitcoin, and that is that nobody controls it. And so it's not about the size of the blocks, it's not about the block time, it's not about any one particular technical decision. That's not what makes Bitcoin important. What makes Bitcoin important is that no single person or entity is able to control it and to determine how it proceeds. And so the problem with all those forks is that they all start off from the point that one person decided that this is the correct way in which we need to go. And so that person decided to fork off in that direction. So, good luck to them, because now all they have is something that they control, that they're going to continue to control. So none of them matter.
And so once you discovered or started reading more about Austrian economics and discovering Bitcoin, how do you see Austrian economics helping the global economy? Like, why do you believe, I wouldn't say believe, but what kind of advice can you tell people that Austrian economics might be a better model than what we have today with Keynesian economics?
I mean, it's a difficult question to really answer. I think the prime value proposition, as far as I'm concerned, is that I think it's a better way of understanding the world. It's a way that makes more sense. I think, in my opinion, if you spend a lot of time reading both viewpoints, I think you'll come to the conclusion that you're able to get a better grasp of reality by understanding the works of classical Austrian economists and their way of explaining the world. So that's primarily the main advantage. The second thing is that, based on understanding this, the politically unpopular conclusion that the Austrian economists come up with is about how the nature of the market system functions because of the price mechanism and because prices serve to communicate knowledge and information. And so the way that the market system functions has to involve people making their own decisions, able to calculate their own preferences and make their own decisions based on how much they value their time and their labor and their different goods and services. So in order for the market system to truly function, people have to have the freedom to take their own decisions, both in production and in consumption. And so therefore, anytime somebody intervenes in someone's freedom, in someone's economic freedom, anytime somebody imposes an economic decision on somebody else, there's no escaping the fact that that's going to be, that's first, it's immoral, because if you can't accept that those two people are both human beings and one of them gets to impose their will on the other, you can't find that in any way moral. And secondly, it's destructive for economic value, even if you think about it in terms of the benefit overall. it's destructive towards economic value in the long run. So therefore, they become libertarian. They lean, according to today's political spectrum. Austrian economists would be considered, extreme libertarians because they don't believe in any kind of government intervention in individual economic decisions, including intervention in the market for money. And so, for me, the most interesting aspect of Austrian economics, perhaps, and the one that I focus on in my book, is the analysis of hard money and sound money versus easy money or government-imposed money, and the detrimental effects that has on economy. And I think a lot of the problems that you see in the world economy today can be explained through the fact that we have long-term money that loses its value in the long term, that incentivizes people to think in the short term, that incentivizes people to borrow more, to spend more, rather than save and invest for the long run.
Well, I saw in the Mises report before, the average life length of a fiat currency is 27 years.
Yeah.
Take all the currencies around the world and you divide it, it's 27 years, the survival rate of that. And for me, it scares me. Like, you look at the buying power of the American dollar right now, circa, like, say, 1960 compared to that. You've lost it tenfold in buying power.
Yeah, the inflation statistics don't necessarily reflect this pretty well because, they change the kind of goods, and because we need to understand that, technology is always making things cheaper. So in a world of hard money, things will be getting cheaper.
It cheaper, but if you follow Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the stuff that we as humans need, food and shelter,
absolutely,
are fucking going up.
Exactly.
Like, exponentially going up.
Yeah, inflation is not bad if you don't eat and don't live in a home and don't consume energy.
It's like, great, I got a cheaper fucking iPhone today.
Exactly.
But my rent is skyrocketed.
Well, when they calculate the inflation, they take into account the improvements in the processing power of your laptop.
Yeah.
So because your laptop is getting faster, they take that as a drop in the price of processing power. And so they average that with the increase in the price of the food, and so you come up with the magical 2-3% inflation that they always get at. But of course, that's just completely arbitrary about what you define as a good. And, it conflates the technological improvement and the increases in productivity with the increases in the money supply and the monetary inflation, which is a long-run phenomenon. And I think, it's useful to compare prices of food and essentials over time. You see, I think, a huge increase over time. And I think
produce has been increasing dramatically year by year.
For sure, absolutely. All the things that are easy to produce in mass quantities, and so that includes junk food.
Yes.
The price for junk food drops, and so people are happy to say, you look at, maybe French fries are getting cheaper, or, soda keeps getting cheaper, but that's just industrial stuff. And so, you get a bigger factory, you use more energy, and you have more industrial, large-scale production involved. Yes, you can get the price down over time. It definitely happens. But that's not the nutritious stuff, the food that's actually nutritious, that requires, actual people to take care of it and grow it over time and to maintain it well. That's still extremely expensive. It continues to become more and more expensive over time.
Yes.
And that explains, the deterioration in people's health. I think this is a very important factor. I didn't get into this in my book, but this is part of the new research that I've been working on since finishing the book. The prevalence of so many diseases and obesity is, people think of it as just being a result of abundance because we eat a lot. But the reality is, it's not really abundance. It's poverty, really, because people don't eat real, healthy, nourishing food because instead they eat a lot of junk, and so it's poverty and it's malnourishment, and I think it's worth considering the relationship between the growth of this kind of food and the destruction of the value of the currency, both in terms of how much government has subsidized the unhealthy
corn, and
soy,
factory farming and soy.
Exactly. All kinds of factory and intensive farming have been massively subsidized because they bring the prices of food down, and so help downplay inflation. Whereas, and that has resulted in people eating more and more of that stuff. Plus, you add to the fact that, just the general aspect of what I call increasing time preference as a result of the decrease in the value of money. As people realize, it's harder to save for the future, money is less likely to to hold on to its value, people are less likely to think of the future and more likely to prioritize the present more and more. And so this kind of decision making leads to more and more unhealthy decision making in all aspects of life. And so you see increases in debt as well as increases in diseases and obesity and so on. And I think it's really very, very telling to try and understand that through the lens of time preference. It's my favorite topic in my book, chapter 5, all about the relationship between money and time preference. And I think it's a very important topic that people today should really be thinking about more.
So let me ask you this question. It's, I think in the crypto world, I've been in the crypto space for a while now. And, we live in this bubble, right? You have, the Bitcoiner, maximalist or minimalist, and you have open finance, decentralized finance with Ethereum crowd and all these different camps. And all of them, do you want to change the world? Great. But we live this very tiny bubble. You and I here are talking about the benefits of Austrian economics, benefits of Bitcoin. But how can the majority of the world benefit from this information? What can my mom do? What can my brother do? What can that person on the street over there do that he maybe when he has $400 in savings? This is the majority. Like, that's the rest of it. What can they do with this information to benefit them, or themselves, I should say?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I don't think of myself as an evangelist for Bitcoin. Sure. I don't particularly care if people get on Bitcoin or not. I'm fascinated by it as an economic phenomenon, but I want to make it clear to everyone, I don't care if you buy Bitcoin, and I'm not here to find use cases for people. So, the person on the street may not have a use for Bitcoin. And I know a lot of people have no use for Bitcoin. They seem to be living their lives fine. So I'm not going to be pushing it on people or trying to impose it or try to find a way where it's useful. I think where it is interesting for people, if somebody were to ask me what's interesting about it, I would say it's the most advanced form of money that has ever been invented. And so if you're curious about understanding why, I think you should first invest in reading about it, understanding what it does, how it works, why it works, how to own Bitcoin, how to transact with it, and then understand the technical and technological capabilities it offers you. And I think this is a key point that, with Bitcoin, ultimately the real value proposition for an individual is the fact that this is a way to send money anywhere around the world, send value anywhere around the world, without having to go through many of the traditional intermediaries. And for most people, this isn't life-changing, but it's a good, I think, backup emergency plan to have. You have a few $100 stored in Bitcoin on a password somewhere. Might come in handy one day. You need to send money somewhere, or
we see it, Bitcoin or cryptocurrency in general, they're being more or less used in places of need. Like, we go back to Austrian economics. Let the markets decide, where the markets, this natural equilibrium in Venezuela, right? We just had an interesting podcast the other day talking about the volume in Venezuela. You look at Iran today, you look at Middle East, my wife is from Kuwait. We have a lot of relatives over there. High volumes in Middle East, depending on where you are from, Russia, China. So places where it's a necessity, they're using it. So over here in North America, we live in a little bubble world, decent banking system, decent government, they're not coming out and knocking on my door, etc. So it's like, why the fuck do I need it, really? But those places, I would say the majority of the world lives in some form of a dictatorship, some form of a government that has sanctions on what they can and can't do.
Yes, and these lines are fuzzy pretty much everywhere in the world. What counts for being legal here is illegal somewhere else. And so the main value proposition for people is as a little bit of an insurance, to just have a little bit of money there. For people in I think people who think they have no problems in their own countries with their banking system. But generally, I always say, demand for Bitcoin is an inverse function of trust in global central banks. Yes. And so as long as people, I think, the worst thing that could happen to Bitcoin would be a return to sound money. I think, the easiest way to kill Bitcoin, well, not necessarily the easiest, but I think the most effective way to kill Bitcoin would be for governments to implement complete free markets in money, probably a return to gold standard.
Because then it loses its value prop.
Exactly. If everybody can use, yeah, absolutely. If everybody can use physical gold,
Yeah.
and we have global markets for the clearance of physical gold and digital gold backed by physical gold, I don't. Perhaps the demand for Bitcoin would decline massively. But as long as as long as governments impose capital controls, as long as inflation is a problem, you can continue to see it growing and in people finding more use in it. And I think the other thing is it's a legitimate function of Bitcoin that people speculate on this user case. And I think this is, people sometimes say, well, Bitcoin is only useful for speculation, as if that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
But I think, speculation is an essential function of markets. It's what markets are all about.
Yep.
People are always speculating about different value propositions, and they speculate by dedicating their money and their capital towards things that they think will outperform in the future, and they're rewarded for making the correct choice. And so Bitcoin is a speculative bet, in a sense that people who are holding it are betting that in the long run it's likely going to prove to be a better system relatively to where it is today in the future. It's going to improve compared to its competition. So the speculation and the speculative demand on Bitcoin is a legitimate demand, and I think people will speculate on it. And the thing that drives Bitcoin forward, for me, the most important, is the fact that it's scarce. And so the scarcity of it means that as people speculate on it, nobody can increase more of the supply of it, and so therefore inflate the quantity and increase the supply and bring the value down. And that's what makes it more attractive as a speculative bet for more and more people.
What's your predictions in the next year or so within the space in general?
I mean, generally, every year I make the same prediction, which is that Bitcoin is going to issue a new block every 10 minutes, according to the schedule.
Yeah.
And I've been doing pretty well on this, so I'm going to stick with this. Generally, I don't know. This is really what I think matters the most in the space in general and in Bitcoin. Ultimately, it's a very simple technology that does one new block every 10 minutes or so. And if it continues to do that, it continues to prove its reliability. And the longer it continues to survive doing that, the more interesting and compelling it becomes as a monetary alternative.
Cool. Thank you. Well, I appreciate you coming in, speaking
Thank
with
you.
us. If
My
people want to
pleasure.
get in contact with you, I know you have a book. How can they reach you? Where can they get your book at?
Yeah, so my book is The Bitcoin Standard. It's available at Amazon and has now been translated to 12 other languages.
Oh, great. Wow.
So yeah, you can find out more about it on my Twitter, Saifedean, Saifedean, on Twitter, and also my website, saifedean.com. And you can see my blog as well. It contains some of my recent blog posts. And also you can get my subscription research on my Patreon on patreon.com/Saifedean.
Cool, man. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. Cheers.